Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video with Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge here on the internet. Today's video was chosen by our awesome patrons. This video was chosen in this week's poll, and it is Top 10 Evil Historical Figures Too Brutal for History Books by Top 10's Net. Alright, I don't know if that says anything about what our patrons are like, but they want to see, apparently, some brutal history. Anyway, this was, again, chosen by our patron members. If you would like to get involved, there'll be a link down below, and you can join for as little as $1 a month. Get you access to polls, and higher tiers get you things like Discord benefits. Great way to support the channel, if you so choose to do so. If you like this original video, make sure you go down below and there'll be a link to it. Make sure you like and subscribe to them if you like the content here. And let's go ahead and get started. All right, who are they going to put in a top 10? You know, I mean, there's the obvious ones. I'm sure you're going to see. I don't know if they're trying to go like off the cuff, but you're going to like Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Genghis Khan. I don't know. I mean, there's so many things in the traditional sense, but there's probably people that you could view as brutal. But may not get as much the notoriety. So I'm hoping we'll see if we learn anything new, but it should just see how they rank it. What their criteria, I guess, would be. All right, let's start.
Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching Top 10's Net, and in the video today, we're looking at the top 10 evil historical figures who were too brutal for the history books.
Oh, gosh.
We've all heard
Parental
about
advisory.
Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Saddam Hussein, etc. But what about the evil men and women our history books don't really mention?
Okay.
Is there anyone more evil than Hitler? Is there anyone who is more cutthroat, literally and figuratively, than Stalin? The men and women in this video are the people that our history books have forgotten and probably won't appear in one for a long time.
Well, good. I'm glad that that they're bringing this in. You know, it's supposed to be too brutal for history books, right? So I'm glad they're going to try to throw in some stuff that hopefully people haven't heard of as much before. Because I mean, it'd be. I mean, if you did it with all the famous figures, I mean that would take up this whole list. That it would honestly probably be very educational. So, all right, I'm excited. Let's do this.
Let's get started.
Number 10, Elizabeth Bathory. Bathory was born on August the 7th, 1560 in Hungary and was known as a countess. Born into a powerful family name in Hungary, we can probably assume she was well off in life. Bathory was already known as a cutthroat lady because of the countless deaths of peasants and servants under her authority, which she got away with because of her high status. From direct orders made by King Matthias based on his suspicions, he sent Count Gregory Thurzo to the Cestui castle. There he discovered the viciousness of Bathory. Thurzo caught Bathory in the middle of torturing many young girls. Her inhumane form of torture consisted of jamming needles and pins under her victims' fingernails and tying them down to soak them in honey so ants and bees could attack them.
You know, one thing I think about with these leaders, when you hear about them, these murderous leaders, right, is how this brutality, how much of it did they do themselves, and how much did they just kind of either order to be done or were just complicit with. But if you're actually doing that, yeah, then I guess they're actual psychopaths, like this torture.
The Count even participated to please his lady, but when he died in the early 1600s, Bathory's method started getting worse. Bathory, along with her partner in crime, abducted girls and tortured them. She would bite chunks of their flesh, cook them, and force them to eat their flesh. Bathory believed that human blood made an individual's skin look young and healthy. She killed these young girls for their blood and rubbed her body with blood.
Okay, so you're talking
from aging.
Okay, so you're talking about literal psychopaths that actually do this, rather than having some kind of like political motive or something that you would say the Stalin or Hitler are trying to do with political goals. But this just sounds like just pure psychiatry.
Number 9, Queen Mary I of England.
Bloody
We've all
Mary?
heard the urban myth to summon the ghost of a woman called Bloody Mary. Say her name 3 times in a mirror in the dark and boom, she appears. Well, this myth is based on Queen Mary I. Now, she does have a small portion dedicated to her in our history books, but it mainly focuses on her success as a queen. Catholics and Protestants have always had a conflict between the two. During the Protestant Reformation, she killed hundreds of Protestants by burning them at the stake. In her attempt to make England become Catholic, hundreds died, and her hope for a more Catholic England failed.
This story, just to put some context to it, really goes back to Henry VIII, right? Henry VIII was famous for sort of creating Protestantism in a way in England when the Pope denied his request for an annulment of his marriage, and gets Act of Supremacy gets passed, and that gives him authority over the church. So you kind of got beginning stages of Protestantism, although there were a lot of things that were similar with Catholicism that ends up being created there with him. But then the next little while in English history, there's kind of this back and forth between being a Protestant nation and between being a Catholic nation. So you'll see, like, after that, after King Henry VIII, they kind of swing more towards Protestantism, right? And then you move to Queen Mary, who was a devout Catholic and wanted to revert England in a way back to Catholicism, was known for persecuting and like burning Protestants at the stake. And when she dies, I think few mourn. And then I think it's Edward, I think, that takes over after. That was kind of like the neutral and kind of granted, I think, tolerance towards Catholics and Protestants a lot more. So, especially amongst English Protestants, she gets a really, really bad mark with her name there. All right, Talat Pasha. I don't know this.
Berate. Talat Pasha. This prime minister to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire was responsible for the genocide of the Armenian people.
It's the Armenian
now, many
genocide.
Americans do not like to refer to this as a genocide because Turkey is a US ally, but this was nonetheless still...
Some irony there, right? The Armenian genocide, of the modern genocides, is probably the one that's ones that's most overlooked, but constantly brought up as like, this needs to be studied more, this needs to be understood more. And hopefully they give some of the context in here with the role with the Armenian genocide with the World War I here.
A genocide. This is also the reason why Turkey cannot join the EU, because the Turkish government will not admit that it was a genocide. Pasha declared more than war against the Armenians. He declared an order to wipe out the entire race. Armenians were tortured, raped, killed, and robbed of all their belongings. Pasha and his partners forced Armenians into concentration camps. Pasha made people carry heavy supplies and forced them to walk miles without any food or water. If they failed, they would be killed. Many individuals were forced to rape their family members. Armenians were killed with clubs, hammers, axes, bayonets, and saws. Pasha's soldiers would even gash Armenian sex organs. Pasha is responsible for killing nearly 1.5 Armenians out of 2.5 million. Number 7.
The big context there was the Turkish were fearful of the Armenians as descended during World War I, as somebody that could potentially be an aid to the enemies like the Russians, and that's what was often seen as the justification for this. It's more part of World War I than like a genocide. And perspective is obviously huge for that, but it's a big stain in modern Turkey's eyes, even with it being an Ottoman Empire thing. But yeah. Ugh.
Evan Yosef Mengele. Many say you can't blame those who kill people if they were ordered to do so under executive orders. If you have your life on the line or your family's, you would do whatever you have to keep them safe.
That's such a big debate we have in my classrooms all the time. We talk about aftermath of World War II and stuff like that. Specifically when we talk about the Nuremberg trials, in my classes, we'll talk about what about those that were ordered to do these executions, right? Where do you put blame or punishment with those individuals that carried out these orders, which were orders, in relationship to those that actually put out the orders, that did the orders, right? It always strikes up a very interesting debate, and I'm sure you've had it too in your classes.
It's human instinct to do so. Under Hitler's order, Mengele was ordered to kill the Jews. Well, why does Mengele make the list if we should pardon those who kill under executive order? Well, Mengele was a physician. He was in charge of sending the Jews to concentration camps or to be killed. He chose the people to do experiments on. His most common experiments were done on twins, where he would look for the differences and similarities. He would try to change twins' sexual organs, pour chemicals into their eyes, see if he could create conjoined twins, force parents to kill their children, and torture the twins only to see how long they could survive. He killed 2,800 twins out of 3,000 and sent nearly 500,000 people to death camps. He then escaped Germany and went to South America, where it is believed that he did medical experiments on about 90 more twins. Number 6.
Yeah, that's been a famous part with the Nazis that people talk about, is the weird medical experiment things that they were doing, the eugenics and all that sort of thing. Yeah, I heard they had some fascination with twins, and thinking like if you had like injected one with a disease, would it like the other one contract it, and just like things that just like what are you, not just the brutality, but from a scientific perspective sounds so stupid and ridiculous. Right? And those stories are just, yeah, I mean, that's awful. All right, I told Khomeini we're going to Iran.
Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini had a tough childhood, losing his father at the age of 5 months and his mother and aunt, who raised him in his teens. He grew up on his own. He then began to study Islam in depth. He personally believed that the leader of a country must be a religious role model. Instead of continuing a career into politics, he got deeper into his faith.
Pay attention to this stuff with the, a lot of people when I'm putting out this video, in the recent era, the tensions between the United States and Iran, and how a lot of it goes back to the Iranian Revolution. He, of course, is a big part of that. So understanding the movement from the Iranian Revolution had to make a less secular, less Western style government. What that, of course, would look like to them would be Islamic, right? Because he's an Islamic cleric, and the country should be run under that type of guidance as an Islamic state that way.
He then became the religious leader of Iran from 1979 to 1989. He led the Iranian Revolution, which killed nearly 50,000 civilians. In the Iranian Revolution, in the name of Allah, Khomeini made his soldiers kill people who did not believe in Allah. If people listened to music, they would be killed or in prison. Couples were lashed nearly 100 times for kissing in public. Civilians were shot, hanged, gassed, stabbed, stoned, and burned alive. The punishment for stealing was to cut your hands off. Women's faces were burnt by acid. In 1988, Khomeini ordered his men to kill every prisoner if they did not repent for their sins. Children would be hanged from cranes. He held 52 Americans captive for over a year, and
Iranian
some were
hostage
kept for
crisis.
6 years. Khomeini is largely responsible for the Islamic Holy War and the rise of Al-Qaeda. Number 5, Thomas de Torquemada.
Yeah, look into the Iranian Revolution. It's probably one of the most important things in modern history that really helps describe a lot of the turmoil in international politics, specifically with the Middle East, and especially for American foreign policy, not just American foreign policy, but just foreign policy in general with the Middle East. And the Iranian Revolution is a big part of that, because you can connect all types of different things to power vacuums and wars and terrorist organizations that have a domino effect, kind of direct and indirect connection with the results of the Iranian Revolution back in 79 into the 80s.
Now, for those who are saying Islam is a religion of killing innocent people and it's evil, then this guy here is for you. Torquemada was the Inquisitor of Spain from the years 1483 to 1498. In his attempt to save the Catholic Church in Spain, and in the name of God, he was responsible for the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was an ecclesiastical tribunal run, used to pick out those who threatened the Roman Catholic Church in Spain. Without evidence, Torquemada would order that Jews be tortured or killed, reason being, he didn't like them. Jews and many other people he thought were a threat to the church were tortured, killed, and were forced to surrender their property. Children were left to starve to death. When civilians were being tortured, they were usually naked. Torquemada's favorite torture methods were foot roasting and suffocation. People would be grilled, hanged, and burned. Torquemada would pull people's arms and legs out of sockets. He would force water down the throats and use a very tight cord to stop the blood flow of his victims. He would crush people with extremely heavy weight, and they would be pushed into chairs that had sharp points around the neck region. He used tools that would force their body to stretch, rip off his victims' nipples, ears, tongues, and genitals, and he would skin people.
You see that the Iron Maiden? I did hear something that I don't know if there's evidence that this was actually ever used, but maybe it was more of a threat. I'd heard that before.
Rip off his victims' nipples, ears, tongues, and genitals, and he would skin people. His actions and ideologies influenced future Queen and King of Spain, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Torquemada killed over 30,000 people. Number 4.
Let's talk about the change in religious tolerance that took place in Spain after the Reconquista. So before the Reconquista in 1492, Spain was ruled by the Islamic Moors, right? And it was known as an era of actually quite a bit of religious tolerance. Christians, Muslims, and Jews all lived together in relative peace, and especially their elites out of those groups, especially educated elites coming out of those three groups, made Spain one of the more educated places. Places like Toledo, which becomes what you call Andalus, which was the Islamic Spain. There was a place of huge academic achievements as those different cultures all lived relatively peacefully under the Moorish time period, and those successes were able to be shared. And then with the Reconquista that happens, that religious tolerance abruptly ended and became very, very intolerant for anyone that was not Catholic at this time. So it's Jews and Muslims, and trying to purge all that out, which is kind of the nasty part of the Reconquista and the Inquisition specifically.
4. Ivan the Terrible.
All right.
Ivan the Terrible, also known as Ivan the...
I've done video or a reaction video to an Ivan the Terrible one, so if you know about him or want to know more, look up that in my playlist.
4th was the Tsar of Russia from 1533 to 1548. Even as a child, Ivan was cutthroat. He abused animals such as dogs and cats and threw them from the top of buildings.
They say sign of
He began
psychopath,
killing
right?
people in his teenage years because it was amusing. As the Tsar of Russia, he was quite paranoid and believed everyone was against him. He would strip citizens of their homes and land, forcing them to be homeless. He destroyed hundreds of villages and towns.
You know, they talk about paranoia. That's been a major feature of, you see a lot of very eccentric rulers, is the idea of paranoia here, like Roman emperors like Nero or something, and we're always paranoid that people are out to get them. Of course, though, just because you're paranoid that people are out to get you doesn't mean people are not out to get you, and I'm sure there are plenty of people are for people like this. You know, a lot of it, I'm sure, it's very justified, but I guess the difference is how a paranoid person like this reacts, like one with premeditated violence and stuff like that.
He was also responsible for the Novgorod massacre, where 60,000 people were tortured. He created his own torture chamber and sentenced entire families who he believed were enemies there. He got a bear and ordered many people to be eaten by bears and wolves. He had such an obsession with people dying that when he ordered people to be killed, he usually sat cozy and watched beside him were the parents watching the torture and execution of their children. See,
that's where you talk about the difference between these rulers that will give an order to do a killing, but then actually witness or participate. That's where you get in the real psychopath nature, right?
Executions lasted 15 hours. He removed people's ribs with hot pinchers. He raped girls and used them as target practice. After being married for a day, he killed his wife. He beat his pregnant daughter-in-law because he believed that her clothes were inappropriate, and killed his son by stabbing him in the head over an argument. He was a serial killer, nonetheless, and deserved the name that was given to him. Number 3, Idi Amin. Idi Amin is what we call a politician. He promised democracy and change to the people of Uganda and to the world. Rather than changing Uganda to the promised land, he turned it into a poverty-stricken land and a killing field. He is considered the most sadistic dictator in the 20th century. He abused human rights, killed and
That's
expelled.
sadistic dictatorship in the 20th century. That is saying a lot. You're going up against some pretty big people, so holy cow.
80,000 Asians from Uganda and was a political repressor. He killed hundreds of thousands of his own people. He would show live executions on television and tortured and killed soldiers, government officials, police officers, engineers, doctors, journalists, and many more. Amin's torture methods ranged from burying people alive, throwing people to crocodiles, forcing people to eat their own flesh, and he even mutilated one of his wives by sewing her limbs upside down.
Okay, you wonder why. Like, why of these things, right? Why of all these things out there would you do to these lengths? There's like killing people and all that, but the creative ones.
He considered himself a cannibal as he ate human flesh and drank blood. Amin killed nearly 500,000 Ugandans.
That's psychopath, right?
Number 2, Pol Pot. Pol Pot served as Prime Minister of Cambodia from 1976.
Khmer Rouge. This one, he actually does get talked about quite a bit. It's just like, when you talk about, especially the 20th century dictators, it's amazing how many bad, awful ones there were when it comes to killing your own people. But then how many get overshadowed just for the fact that there are so many of them in the 20th century that if they're living at other times or whatever, you would put them in much more infamy.
6 to 1979.
I mean, we'll see if they get to it, but if I remember right, the Khmer Rouge, didn't they, I believe they purged something like 25% of their entire population, like ended up getting just purged, killed.
His goal was to destroy Cambodia as a whole and later turn it into a new age. Pol Pot is known as the only man in history who ordered a genocide against his own country. His plan was to ban the Buddhist religion, possessions, and money. He separated families and put people into slave labor. People died from malnutrition, terrible medical care, execution, and starvation. Thousands were hanged and died from disease. During the rainy season, Pol Pot would force pregnant women, children, and the elderly to work on canals with water at neck level. If they failed to work, they would be killed. If you could not work because of an illness or just were not physically capable to, you would not be fed or you would be killed. If a civilian made a mistake in their job, they would be whipped to death or shot. Cambodians had no right to eat under Pol Pot. If people were caught eating when they weren't allowed to, they would be buried alive. Pol Pot hated the Vietnamese people and aimed to kill any Vietnamese that came to his sight. If you weren't Vietnamese but just looked like one, you would be killed. Prisoners of Cambodia were forced to drink urine and were beaten with hammers and axes. Pol Pot kept the skulls of some of the people he killed. He killed nearly 3 million of his own people. Number 1, King Leopold II of Belgium.
Okay, because I was really wondering what they would do with this. I mean, they kind of, when they put Pol Pot in there, I thought, okay, maybe they're going to open it up to some of the more famous ones, but I thought Pol Pot might already be in the famous kind of category. But I mean, they didn't know Hitler, no Stalin. I'm surprised they went with King Leopold, but this dude was absolutely brutal. The King of Belgium, which gets totally thrown under the whole like pile of awful things that happen in the era of new imperialism at the turn of the 20th century, of what he did to the people of Congo. Let's jump in though. I'm talking too much, but it's interesting that they are going to put him in there. But I want to see some of the specifics they're going to talk about with Leopold.
Although he was the King of Belgium, he ruled over the Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908. King Leopold is considered the greatest manipulator in politics. He made the world believe he was helping the Congo for the best, but in reality he was ruling by using forced labor. Under his ruling, the Congo was subject to a horrible regime. The relationship between the Congo and King Leopold is considered the greatest political scandal in history.
See what that guy's holding? His hands cut off. What the Belgians were doing in Central Africa, the scramble for Africa, as it was called, that started in the late 1800s, was basically this kind of mad dash of industrial European nations that were basically trying to overrun Africa for its resources and things. And Europeans had never had success at internally colonizing Africa. The Belgians were one of the first to do that, and Congo's right in the heart of it. And specifically, the resource they were going for was rubber. There's abundance of rubber trees in that area, so they colonized it and then basically put the people in slave-like labor. And if there was disobedience, subordination, you saw very swift, very visual punishments. Like you saw, a lot of people had limbs cut off as signs of warning for dissidents.
His men tortured and slaughtered about 10 million Congolese. Congolese were killed if they didn't produce enough goods. Many of their villages were destroyed. Natives would be thrown into jungles. Natives were raped by Leopold's men. Millions died because of starvation, and nearly 500,000 died because of diseases. Under Leopold's reign over the Congo, he killed nearly 50% of the population.
I had not heard that number. I knew it was a lot. I had no idea it was at 50%.
Under Leopold's reign over the Congo, he killed nearly 50% of the population.
So some of those people were super brutal. If you know of any others who we missed, let alone them being missed in the history textbooks, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to read about them. Also, do subscribe to our channel for brand new videos every day, and don't forget to like this video if you did enjoy it. Over there on the right, a couple of other videos you'll probably like, the top 10 villainous rulers, and below that, top 10 lesser facts known about Napoleon. So be sure to check those out, and thank you for watching.
All right, obviously pretty disturbing content in this video, but we all know it's very important that, I mean, there are these horrible parts of history, but actually how important they are to discuss them and look at the causes and effects of such types of actions, right, in history. The whole famous adage of those that don't learn history are doomed to repeat it, that kind of thing. And that's, I mean, that is, and that is very, very important to talk about these type of things. You know, when we study them, trying to find commonalities. What are the, what seem to be, what are like the common denominators, all right, for how these conditions arise that this type of brutality can exist? Can we identify those common factors that again bring this type of thing, and hopefully eradicate those for the future? So you know, it is very important you talk about them, and history is not G-rated. Anyone that's taken a real history class, that then you should obviously know that. And yeah, you should be mature and prepare yourself for learning such things, because it's among the most important lessons you can learn in education. One of the major reasons, of course, we learn about history. We learn how the world works. It's a famous thing I say in my classes. The biggest reason we learn about history is because it teaches us how the world works and why the world is the way it is, and we can navigate an increasingly difficult to navigate world. And developing those skills is going to make you a much more successful person, right? Well, anyway, yeah, there's, you know, it's hard to rank something like this. How do you quantify this type of list? So maybe we don't need to, you know, be as much as ranking them, but understanding more about these actions and what has happened. And like I was saying, the underlying causes that create these type of environments where this can exist. All right, but yeah, important, very important stuff there. Again, this video was chosen by our patrons in this week's poll. If you'd like to, again, be a part of that in the future, go down below. You'll see a link to the Patreon where you can get involved that way. If you have not joined our historical community on Discord, definitely do that too. We got over 4,400 people at this time, and there's a link down below. You can get involved with a lot of history-minded people that way. I'd love to have you as a sub if you have not, and be a part of our community. Thanks for liking the video. Most importantly, just thanks for watching. Thanks for appreciating history for how important it is, and hope to see you very soon. Bye.